Welcome to the Noob's Guide to Modding Headers. A nice set of headers will complement a nice catback system, but it will also add a lot more tone to your sound. If you want your Boxer to rumble like a V8, there's a header for that. If you want your Corvette to sound like a Ferrari, there's a header for that too. Where most exhaust systems just amplify your stock sound, headers can actually change the entire dynamic of your car's sound. Sound aside, I'm sure you're interested in more performance benefits. Unlike stock exhaust manifolds, headers give each cylinder an individual exhaust tube which allows for better flow. These individual tubes eventually meet back together before connecting to your vehicle's mid-pipe. Now do note that some headers will still feature high flow catalytic converters and will meet there before joining the mid-pipe, and that's mostly for states that have emissions testing. Another benefit of headers is that they're a lot lighter. This is mostly because exhaust manifolds are made of cast iron, which is not only heavier but prone to rust. Stainless steel and titanium headers not only weigh a lot less, but they also look a lot better and give your vehicle a lot more flow and longevity in regards to its performance and showmanship. The benefits of performance and sound provided by headers will vary based on the type of headers that they are. And just like everything else in life, size matters too. And before you feel bad about running shorties, remember that how you use it also matters. So let's talk about the various applications of the different header types and all the advantages and disadvantages that come with them. Short tubes, also known as shorties. They get their name from being the shortest of all header options, but do keep in mind that their overall length is actually still longer than that of your stock exhaust manifold. For the law-abiding folk, short tube headers are legal to use in many states that require annual emissions, as long as you keep your catalytic converters and O2 sensors. The main advantages of shorties is that they're very cheap to purchase and install since they don't have fitment issues in the engine bay. You'll love the low end torque benefits and the growl they bring to your lower RPMs. The overall verdict is that shorties are great for daily drivers since you spend most of your commute in the lower RPMs anyway. If you like your car's stock sound and just want it amplified with a little growl, then shorties are the best way to go. Long tube. There are actually two kinds of long tube headers, mid-length and true long tube. So why are mid-length still called long tube then? Well, the first reason is mostly just marketing purposes, it's just so they can market to you as a long tube. The second reason is that ever since the 1970s, where a lot of emissions regulations were packed on, the hot rod era started to die down, and the headers of that era also joined in that dying as well, having generally become a lot shorter these days. A lot of mid-length headers would be considered wimpy dwarfs compared to the headers of the past, but in today's modern world they are far longer than anything we're used to seeing, hence they are still classified as long tube headers. The main advantage of mid-length long tube headers is that they create a very balanced power and sound spectrum that stretches along your car's power band. For those who still want a deep rumble but also want a nice balanced tone, mid-length is the best choice. It's going to keep your car sounding tame and classy. From a pricing standpoint, mid-length headers are fairly priced, but installation may be trickier depending on the vehicle. Really, the only disadvantage of the mid-length long tube headers is that they sometimes require you to shuffle things around in your engine bay for clearance purposes. And moving on to headers that some of us can only dream about, true long tube headers. True long tubes get their name from the hot rod era that they originate from because they are the actual long tube length. But they're becoming less and less prevalent these days. Chances are, if you see a long tube header for sale, it's actually just a mid-length header, unless stated otherwise. A true long tube header is much longer than a mid-length setup, and you can see the length occur in this curvature area, where it's a lot straighter and it dips a lot lower as opposed to a mid-length header where it's more curvy and it doesn't dip quite as low. The main advantages of true long tube headers are bragging rights, exotic high-pitched sound, and massive performance gains. True long tube headers move your vehicle's power towards the end of its power band, thus little drone exists in the lower RPMs, so when cruising on the highway it's very nice. While this means that you can't really take advantage of the power in local traffic, keep in mind that long tube headers still have more low-end power compared to your stock manifold, just not as much compared to shorties. The main reason you would think about running true long tubes is for track racing, drag racing, and other high-performance scenarios where your car will spend most of its time in the lower gears and higher RPMs. The second reason would be for its sound. Long tubes are ridiculously loud, and I mean that in the sense that there's no sound drop-off whatsoever. So unlike shorties and mid-lengths, true long tubes carry sound all the way to the red line, whereas something like a shorty, especially combined with an X-pipe, are louder at idle to low RPM, and they actually become raspier and more tone deaf when you rev higher, which is counterintuitive. Now, this loss of tone, it's not only unattractive, most track drivers rely on sound to know when to shift because you really don't want to stare at your car's dashboard when racing. If your sound is dropping off before hitting peak RPM, it will mess with your ability to shift at peak RPM. But if your sound is progressively carrying itself all the way until redline, you will get used to shifting at your car's loudest point, hence making long tubes superior for track usage. Now, as much of a pedestal as I hold true long tubes on, for all the advantages they have the most disadvantages compared to the other headers as well. True long tubes are very, very expensive, not just to purchase, but also to install. The reason they're expensive to install is because of fitment issues. You'll find yourself rearranging half of your engine bay before you realize that, well, you only got one of them in, now you got the other side to do as well. And once you get both of them in, that's not where all the clearance issues end, because you'll find that your ground clearance is also something that you've lost. True long tube headers are known for dipping low in order to achieve that extra length, and will become your car's newest, lowest hanging modification, aside from your wheels and tires obviously, although I could be wrong, maybe you have some stance car where you're scraping all over the place, but the point is, for the sensible folk, long tube headers, you really should be raising your car up a little bit if you are currently lowered. And if you're still at stock ride height, you may want to only lower half an inch to an inch, or even just stay at stock ride height, unless you love scraping and sparking all over the place. Now, in regards to them being expensive while purchasing, that's just mostly because not a lot of companies make them anymore. And that's because they're being phased out of production, again, due to emissions regulations, and also due to lack of demand, since modern cars don't have as much space to fit them these days. The hot rod era really is kind of dying down. That doesn't mean it's impossible to find them, but you might have to turn towards a few select racing companies, or local tuning shops or tuning companies that work with racing cars, in order to get your set of long tubes. Equal versus unequal lengths. Alright, so here's where it gets even more confusing for some of you guys watching. We're going to be talking about length again. Shorties, mid-lengths, and true longs are types of header classifications, but they can be further categorized into equal or unequal. So there are a total of 3 header types and 6 subsets, and we'll talk about degrees later because that's another one that makes even more subsets. Look, I drew a pretty diagram so you can keep up, alright? We good? If not, pause here if you need to, because I'm moving on. Once you've decided on shorties, mid-length, or true longs, you'll also have to decide on whether you want it to be equal or unequal length. Equal length headers and unequal length headers have their own sets of benefits that do completely different things depending on the vehicle they're used for. Let's talk about equal length headers first. As the name implies, equal length means that all tubes are exactly the same length or similar enough length. Most aftermarket headers made for American muscle cars or boxer engines have their equal length headers a few centimeters off from one another, and they're known as quasi-equal length. The difference between quasi-equal length and true equal length is not major enough for me to split them up into 2 different categories, and for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it as simple as possible, so let's just keep them together. The advantages of equal length is that they deliver smooth sound and power, especially for low displacement turbocharged vehicles. And this smoothness also helps keep your car at an equal temperature for its cylinders' exhaust gases, which improves overall reliability. Speaking of reliability, equal length headers also reduce a car's chance of engine knocking or detonation, both of which are known to severely destroy your engine's lifespan, the latter especially. So why would any crazy mad lad run unequal length headers then? Well, it's because they're really obsessed with that rumbling life. Unequal length headers are lighter, and depending on what engine, they may have other benefits too. For boxer engines, unequal length headers will retain more exhaust energy for the nearest 2 cylinders, thus giving more performance benefits. They also are more compact in design when compared to equal length, making them lighter and smaller. Now for something like a flat plane crank V8, unequal length headers can also add some rumble into its life. To demonstrate, think of a flat plane crank like one in a Ferrari. It's smooth and high pitched. However, think of the flat plane crank V8 found in the Ford Shelby GT350. It's deep and rumbly. Why is that so? They are both dual overhead cam flat planes that are similar enough in displacement, so why do they sound so drastically different? Headers is why. The GT350 has a set of unequal headers, and for something like a flat plane crank, you can make it rumbled too, so you can essentially make a European car sound more American. If you want an American car to sound more European, or you want, in other words, you want a rumbly vehicle to sound more smooth, it's a lot more difficult, but it is still possible. You'll have to mess with the header degrees. So back to the diagram I drew earlier. Aside from lengths, there are also 90 degree and 180 degree headers that can be configured. Depending on the engine type, 90 or 180 may be more beneficial than the other, and perhaps the main reason you'd consider doing it is really just for sound. It's not really a performance reason. Sometimes you may even get a performance loss from switching from one to the other, but people are willing to do it just for the sake of the uniqueness it will give their car in regards to sound. It can entirely overhaul your car's tone. For example, when it comes to a cross-plane crank V8 found in American performance cars, they will fire 2 of their cylinders consecutively, and this results in gases bumping into one another, which results in uneven scavenging, and that makes the iconic rumbling or chopping sound that American V8s are known for. With 180-degree headers, the uneven scavenging no longer occurs, as firing pulses seen by the collector occurs every 180 degrees of crank rotation instead of 90. The end result, your cross-plane V8 now scavenges evenly, thus making it higher pitched and smoother sounding like a flat-plane crank V8. Or, in layman's terms, your Corvette now sounds like a Ferrari. And the final noteworthy thing I'd like to mention is that if you're considering a set of headers, you'll also have to get a brand new tune for your vehicle. Without a tune, your vehicle won't make use of its new headers properly and will still have a pesky check engine light. Now for those without an adaptive ECU, the newfound exhaust flow will actually confuse your car's ECU and may even harm its reliability and functionality in the long run. So do pick up a tune for performance and longevity once you get a new set of headers. If you do have an adaptive ECU, you may not get a check engine light, but you may still not be getting the full benefit of your headers. The only advantage of not getting a tune is that some companies, you will violate your warranty if you do get a tune, so you can still install headers and keep warranty if you don't get a tune, but make sure your car is an adaptive ECU if that's the case. Do as you will with that knowledge. And with that, we're done with this week's segment of Noob's Guide to Modding. If you're looking to learn more about cars, make sure to check out my Noob's Guide to Car series. If you want to learn more about modifying your car, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more Noob's Guide to Modding. In the meantime, go check out my guide to modding wheels if you haven't already. Until then, thanks for watching and see y'all next time. Bladed Angel out.